Chapter 8. The Mother-in-Law. Before I describe this woman to you, let's take a deeper look into her fridge to give you an idea of the type of person we're dealing with here. So, as you open the double doors to her ice-making, water-filtered, television-watching fridge, you will find firstly the fullest fridge known to man, with all the luxuries we desire in our own fridges. Marks and Sparks this and Marks and Sparks that, full to the brim with freshly peeled, pre-chopped and cut to size vegetables. A woman with no time on her hands, or a woman with too much money. The finest cuts of meat from the finest delicatessen stood proudly within, not a jar of mayonnaise or bottle of ketchup in sight, and sausages that would make your mouth water by just looking at their juicy, herby thickness, with not an inch of greasy fat in sight. The fridge was so tall that I couldn't even see what was on the top shelf, never mind my 4-foot-nothing mother-in-law-to-be. Maybe the top shelf had been reserved for the bad stuff that she didn't want anybody else to see. Maybe that's where the mayo, salad cream, and other bad foods were kept. I had noticed that she had a little dwarf stepladder that leant against the side of the fridge, so the top shelf was obviously in use, but for her eyes only. Or for the docile giant, I was convinced she kept hidden in the cupboard under the stairs among the array of forgotten coats, bags and shoes of a vast home, only allowed to see the light of day when some menial chore needed his attention. And we can't forget what's on the front of the fridge. Lists upon lists of phone numbers. A popular woman, or maybe her memory was betraying her. Many photos of her sons when they were little dots. A doting mother, or does this show she's still living in the past? A few postcards from her sons when they were in various parts of the world and, may I add, much younger, and the complimentary fridge magnets. A few of cats. Not an animal lover, as she did have a real cat, but couldn't stand it near her, only let in the house when a stray mouse had managed to work its way into the kitchen. And the obligatory home sweet home magnet. You know the one, country cottage and a tacky little poem written below. Oh, and the perfect mother magnet, from daughter to mother, dating back at least 20 years previous. So, the mother-in-law. Or, as I prefer to call her, Mrs. Stuck-Up, her own arse. The woman who was originally from a working-class, Liverpudlian family, but who looked down her nose at the mere sound of a Scouse accent. She, of course, had taken elocution lessons to disguise her own accent when she married into money. Our first meeting had not been a pleasant one. I had been warned in advance, but I thought I could have won around any woman of the man I loved. I had a bit of a northern charm and was pretty good in any type of conversation. But how wrong I was. Our first meeting was similar to the kind of feeling you might get when lying on a bed of nails. Uncomfortable and awkward. Or maybe I should say extremely uncomfortable and very, very awkward. My accent was the first thing to change her perfectly toothed angelic smile into a grimace of pain, and I did think it was pretty strange to be greeted with the question, "And what's your degree in?" This was followed by a look of horror when I innocently replied, "I don't have a degree." This, of course, I found out later from a woman who she herself not only didn't have a degree, but didn't even finish high school. But credit where credit's due, she had managed to get a diploma in a fake accent. So obviously, the mother of her treasured son will go to great extremes to tear him away from the one she doesn't seem fit, by ways only the outsider can sense, the feeling of hatred when all around the others remain calm and unaware. It first started when, in the presence of Mrs. Stuck-Up, she would ask me direct questions, which she already knew the answers to, in front of the others, for pure embarrassment on my part, and, I'm imagining, pure evil enjoyment for herself. For example, the question regarding my degree would pop up often, with follow-up questions. "So, you didn't get the grades to go to university then?" I had, of course, made the grades, but I wasn't given time to answer as she moved swiftly on, leaving that unanswered question lingering in the air for all to ponder over. "So, if you don't have a degree, What are you going to do? This I was allowed to answer, and of course, I had a job and worked hard, but this wasn't the question, so I was only able to answer, "Well, I'm not sure yet," with the response, "Oh, well, you don't really have much of a choice, do you?" I was also ignored a lot and always seated as far away from my husband-to-be, with her controlling the conversations. And if I wasn't being made a mockery of, then I was made to sit in silence, being talked over if I tried to join in the flowing conversation around the table. So, as you can imagine, I started refusing the dinner invites, and she eventually stopped inviting me, a silent understanding. But then one day, Mrs. Stuckup called with an invite, and as usual, my name was not on the list of invitees. However, my husband-to-be had other plans, with the telephone conversation similar to, "When you say me, you do mean my girlfriend as well, don't you, Mum? You do remember I have a girlfriend?" Oh, okay then. Yes, of course, we'd love to come." The royal we. I'd have preferred to have stayed at home and watched some paint dry than have to bear another ordeal of humiliation or to have to sit in silence for the whole of the evening. But she had invited me, and I had run out of excuses after around 6 months of, "Oh, I'm sorry, love. I said I'd go out with the girls that night." Or, "Oh, bugger, I really can't go as we're having a leaving party for a work colleague." Or, even on the night of the required event, "I really don't feel well, babe, but I think I have a bug or something. I'll just stay at home and relax. You go and enjoy yourself. After all, it is your family. They won't mind me not being there." Excuse after excuse after excuse. But this invite I couldn't wiggle out of, as it was for tonight, and I'd already said I had no plans and had been thinking of a cosy night in for two. I had been tricked. So I'd been inadvertently once again invited for dinner, and now the telephone conversation had moved on to my likes and dislikes. "Is there anything she doesn't like to eat, darling?" The response being, "Yeah, Mum, she really can't stomach fish, but anything else is fine." Which was followed by, "Okay, dear, no problem. See you both at 7:30 prompt. Bye." I was suspicious at this sudden interest in my eating habits, but maybe a leopard can change its spots after all, and this was her way to start afresh. So 7:30 arrived, and so did we, at the mother's mansion, dressed in suitably elegant attire. We walked into the grand modern kitchen, where I could definitely smell something fishy, a fish in the oven smell. My husband-to-be saw the look of horror and disgust to the smell and caught me by my arm as I did an about-turn and was ready to scarp her. "Don't worry, she'll have cooked you something different. She's not that vindictive." Famous last words. But of course she has, I reasoned with myself. I had overheard the telephone call after all, and she wouldn't be so blatant in front of her precious son, who had specifically pointed out that I not only didn't like fish, but I couldn't stomach it. So, we were welcomed with polite smiles and kisses on the cheeks, and then we took our places at the table, where, of course, I had been seated as far away from my man as possible, but I was used to this. And then arrived the feast. It started off well, with a delicious bowl of homemade watercress soup. Well, Mrs. Stuckup claimed it was homemade, but I'm sure I'd spied a suspiciously looking open carton of Marks and Sparks soup as we'd been quickly scurried out of the kitchen. I wasn't complaining as it wasn't fish, and so far so good, I hadn't been embarrassingly interrogated. The bowls were cleared, and we all waited in anticipation as Mrs. Stuckup banged pots and pans together in the adjoining kitchen. Fresh bread, steaming vegetables, and a large bowl of salad all arrived on the table. And then, the pièce de résistance. Fish. One portion for each was slowly handed out, and as I sat waiting for the last portion of a non-fish kind, I was sorely disappointed. There it was, a rather larger-looking portion than others, of fish, which was placed under my tight-lipped mouth and now greenish in colour face. I know you said you don't like fish, said the voice from behind who had plonked the disgusting smell in front of me. So I cooked salmon, as it's not really a fish, is it, everyone? She was getting back up from the ones that feared her, and I was stuck with a stomach about to exhibit its insides and looks of anticipation from the others. Will she or won't she eat it? I would have liked to have shoved the plate where the sun didn't shine, but I was brought up with manners. So I thanked Mrs. Stuckup for my plate of hell and kept my nostrils as far away from the rank smell as I could without actually leaving the room. So salmon wasn't exactly a fish. I might not have a degree, but I studied home economics and had watched many nature programs, and from this small but useful education, I had learned that salmon lived in water. They swim, have scales and gills. Oh, and it's the shape of a fish, and smells like a bloody fish. Was this woman actually insane, or was she the most vindictive person I'd ever met? I think the latter, as she certainly wasn't frothing at the mouth with a wide-eyed stare of insanity. No, she was smiling her full, conniving smile whilst placing a fork full of pinky, smelly shit into her mouth. I tried my best to eat around the pink stuff and then mix it with the edible stuff on my plate, just like a child who had been forced to eat something they disliked. Sat at the grown-ups' dinner table with grown-up conversation, yet feeling as small as I had done when I was just 8 years old. Once again, Mrs. Stuckup had shown her evil power. This was the last dinner invite I accepted, and didn't even need to make any excuses from then on. Even after a few years with my man practically begging me to go with him to his weekly feed, I only had to say one word: fish, and the conversation was over. And as I walked down the aisle and past Mrs. Stuckup, I got to thinking, was I marrying just to spite her? And was she sat in the church with her angelic smile and eyes that didn't match just to spite me? Could these people become my family and friends? Or would they become my enemy? Would I be punished for the crime of taking away their beloved friend, brother and son? And what would the punishment be? Hung, drawn and quartered? Or sent to the stocks for more public humiliation? Or maybe the rough, dark seas would turn calm and clear, and the others would be more accepting and tolerant of me after I'd signed that piece of paper that gave me a new name and instant access to new family and friends. Maybe the future would be brighter.